Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our talk. It's called Overcoming Challenges in Adopting Multi-Cloud. Before we get started, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them into the chat below, and we will answer them at the end of the talk. All right, so first of all, probably want to know who we are. My name is Kenaz, and I am a director of product at Puppet, responsible mainly for one of our new product offerings called Relay, which just went generally available in April. So, shameless plug, feel free to go check it out. I've been at Puppet for about 5.5 years and working on mostly on cloud and container technologies. And prior to that, I worked at Microsoft on the Azure compute team for about 5 years, actually helped launch the first version of virtual machines and sort of given a front row seat to watching how organizations are adopting cloud. And I'm here with Dries. Dries, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, so as Kenaz said, I'm Dries. For the last 6 years, I've been an automation architect at Bryxx, which is a Belgian-based managed services provider, mainly focusing around Oracle. But for the last 5 to 6 years, we help our customers manage their infrastructure in a fully automated way. So we only like to do things once, and the second time it should be automated. That's the motto we live by. We are looking for people. So again, also there, shameless plug.
Great. So thanks, Dries. Thanks for joining. So the quote that I like to start with is one that comes from Gartner's study on multi-cloud management and governance approaches, which is that 75% of enterprise customers that are using IaaS will adopt a deliberate multi-cloud strategy by 2022. And this was, I don't know, pretty shocking to me. It seems like a difficult thing to get 75% of enterprises to adopt anything. Maybe starting with secure passwords and two-factor authentication, but much less a fully featured multi-cloud strategy. But I've actually seen some sources claim this number is north of 90%, which is just totally bonkers to me. 2022 is like next year. It's in like 6 months. Wait, okay, no, it's only in May. Okay, so in 7 months, and that seems like a very short amount of time in enterprise years to adopt anything. And so, I mean, I think what this sort of speaks to me is that this is a priority. A lot of organizations are considering multi-cloud, are adopting multi-cloud. And inevitably, as we'll talk here in a couple minutes, there are a lot of challenges and benefits in understanding how a multi-cloud strategy can fit into your business objectives. I think different organizations kind of end up in this place for maybe a couple of different reasons. Potentially, if you say, okay, no, I'm going to be a single cloud company. But then your company acquires another company that uses a different cloud provider. Now suddenly you're a multi-cloud company, and you have to figure out what to do with that and how to manage across multiple cloud providers. But I think what seems crazy to me is that you have AWS who's pushing out services every single year, new services, innovating constantly. And potentially, the pace that they're releasing these services far outpaces almost anyone's ability to actually adopt them. And the first thing that an organization thinks is, okay, you know what I really just need one more collection of services and boxes from a different cloud provider in order to be able to meet my objectives. Just not enough. Just the buffet is not enough. And I know that's maybe an oversimplification of the decision-making process that these organizations that's happening. But as we'll talk through, the reality of now being in a multi-cloud environment is that all of these services and the ability to kind of orchestrate across them, the ability to solve problems that span the underlying technologies, those are the challenges that these organizations are facing. But before we go further, I figured it was useful for us to spend a little bit of time and ask, what do we actually mean by multi-cloud? That seems to be one of those marketing terms that you use when you're not exactly sure what the thing does, and you just sprinkle some multi-cloud over the top of it. And everyone kind of has a little bit of a different take or understanding of what that multi-cloud term means. So in order to kind of disambiguate and kind of poke a little bit of fun at what are we talking about when we are thinking about multi-cloud, I created a little exercise for us. I'm going to use Dries here as my little guinea pig to help me, maybe do your professional assertion or opinion about what these terms are. So if you have a VMware data center, you have another VMware data center, is that multi-cloud?
That's just multi-data center for me, so that's not multi-cloud.
Okay. Yeah, I said the same thing. Yeah, my answer is nah. Not multi-cloud. Yeah, I would call it multi-data center or multi-site. I don't know what people call it these days. Okay, what about VMware plus Azure? What do you think?
That's just plain hybrid, right?
Okay, yeah, I say the same thing, just hybrid. I think multi-cloud implies that there's more public cloud providers, not just a single cloud provider. I think everyone is kind of in this place where you have your on-prem data center and you're now adopting a cloud provider. And yeah, I would call that hybrid. I think that's the reality of where people at. Okay, what about VMware plus Azure plus AWS?
That I would call multi-cloud, because now you have two separate cloud providers. So I would go for
2 thumbs up. Well, 1 thumb up. Yes, I said the same thing.
Yeah.
All right. What about if you have Azure, but you also have Azure Stack?
That's a difficult one, because now you have public cloud in your on-premise environment. So
yeah,
that's a tricky one.
I don't know.
I would go for no. I would go for no.
Maybe. I don't know. That's maybe. It could be. I mean, like the fact that Azure is taking their APIs and you are now porting that over into a on-prem environment that you can have consistency across your public and private cloud environments. But is that a different cloud? I guess so. There's different underlying capabilities in that Azure Stack environment. There's different services. Even though it's technically the same API, you can still use ARM templates to deploy to them. I don't know. I mean, that one's a toss-up for me. The last one I have here is Azure, AWS, Google Clouding, Kyndryl. Have you heard of Kyndryl?
Never. This is my first time. I'm learning something new every day. So great.
IBM spun out their cloud service arm and their managed cloud services, and they call it Kyndryl. In the worst naming decision of the 2021. What would you say?
Well, looks like multi-cloud, but I'm not sure if you want to use 4 different cloud providers.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, I guess so. But why would you do this to yourself? So yeah, I think this exercise is really kind of meant to try to piece apart when we say multi-cloud. I think what we end up getting to is the idea that multi-cloud is using more than one public cloud service provider that are that's providing virtual data storage, compute, network storage, and it provides the ability to sort of leverage and gives you the flexibility to take advantage of those particular cloud services. And then this also mentions it reduces the dependence upon one particular cloud vendor. So the first question is, okay, well, why do people claim, or why do we say that we are organizations want to adopt multi-cloud? What is the chief incentive? And I think a lot of people start here, which is that no vendor lock-in. That's what we're going to get when we adopt multi-cloud. And I think we would say, yeah, maybe, I think that seems to be, to me, one of the biggest misconceptions is that, okay, by adopting multiple clouds, you get zero vendor lock-in. I think the reality is that even if you take something very simple like a AWS VPC, and you're now adopting the same technology in Azure, well, it's just a network collection of IP addresses, something to put your servers on. In reality, a VPC, even in the naming, is not the same thing exactly as a virtual network. And the moment that you actually bind to that cloud provider API in some way, you are, in a sense, technically locked into that particular platform. But and that said, I think there are a lot of reasons to actually a lot of really valid advantages for adopting a multi-cloud strategy. One of those is picking the best of breed tools amongst the cloud provider services. And so if you are, before AWS launched the Lambda service, there was nothing like it. And when they innovated and provided now the ability for you to leverage Lambda to implement serverless based workloads, that is novel and may have really tremendously helped accelerate that particular application. That said, you're locked into that technology now. But that lock-in may be okay because you're able to pick the best of breed tools for a particular application or usage of that technology within your organization. Another benefit here is managing risks across clouds. And so maybe this is what people are actually referring to when they talk about vendor lock-in. Which is the ability to alleviate some of that sort of vendor leverage or pressure when it comes to pricing negotiation, to say, okay, like I actually am not taking too much of a sort of financial or business partnership dependency upon one cloud provider, and instead I'm able to kind of spread it across a couple different cloud providers so that when it comes time to renew my contract, I'm not, fully beholden to a particular cloud provider to provide all my services, but instead I can spread the risk. Another aspect of risk management here is around availability, and saying if none of the no two cloud providers or three cloud providers have all been down at the same time. And so if I can kind of spread out my applications across multiple of these cloud providers, then in theory, I will always be highly available. Of course, there's a lot of hand waving there when it comes to disaster recovery and data portability and making sure that you can actually talk to different. But that's not part of this the first part of this presentation. And finally, the last thing is hiring cloud professionals. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about an organization that may be acquiring another company. But the fact that if you can support different people are, learning and growing in their cloud skills on usually one cloud provider, or at least one main cloud provider, and the ability for you to be able to use different cloud providers and attract different people who are familiar with those technologies seems like a very attractive, value proposition. So next, Dries here is going to sort of walk us through, when people first adopt multi-cloud, what happens?
Yeah, I'm going to use the story of one of our customers. So a few years ago, one of them made the decision to make the move to the cloud. Over half of their compute workload was transferred to AWS. Infrastructure components like ActiveMQ, Apache, and even Oracle databases and WebLogic application servers, they got the cloud treatment. Unfortunately, however, pretty soon they realized their cloud bill, it skyrocketed. So what we started to do was the easy thing. Let's just scale down some environments in times we don't need them, like test and development environments in the weekends or even at night. We just shut them down because no developers were actively using it. So we could just stop the instances. And that saved us some cost. Also, trying to deploy Oracle software on AWS. Now, I tell you, that's a challenge. Having to download massive binary files, get them installed via out-of-date modules, patching them was also cumbersome. So even there, we finally decided to treat the servers as disposable hardware and would rather spin up new custom images, for which, by the way, we had to reinvent a whole new workflow to create them. So yeah, in comes the holy grail of multi-cloud.
That's patching like Oracle workloads that we're running on AWS. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we move those Oracle bits out of the infrastructure into OCI? That was the main reasoning then. So let's use, as you say, Kenaz, using best-of-breed tools. Just run Oracle on Oracle, same as you would run Windows on Azure. It's the same thing. I mean, the vendor knows best how to run its own applications, right? So why don't we just leverage that knowledge and do the sensible thing? This allowed us to really cut costs on licenses. No longer did we need to pay our licenses 24/7, because although our infrastructure was down half of the time, we still had to pay licenses 24/7. While when we moved them to OCI, for example, we could take advantage of a concept like universal credits, where we would pay our Oracle licenses by the minute, same as we would do for compute power. So every time we stopped an instance, we would no longer pay a license, we would no longer pay compute time. Also, deploying the software became a lot easier because of the pre-built marketplace images that were available. We would scrap a whole bunch of Puppet code as well. All the Puppet code that we had built and scraped together to deploy those Oracle software, we do not longer need them. We could also leverage a lot of the cloud-specific services, like the database as a service kind of things, which, by the way, got patched in the background by the cloud provider, by Oracle itself. So even the patching process became a lot simpler. And since we already had the concept of disposable hardware, we combined that with the new marketplace images, and our redeploy cycles are now much cleaner and way more manageable than they were in the past. So yeah, all in all, it was a great transition from going from one cloud to a multi-cloud environment.
So being able
to it was a sensible thing to do also.
Yeah, so being able to take that like workload that is best run in OCI and saying, okay, like, why am I like really banging my head against trying to get this to work in AWS when it's just a much more frictionless experience, in OCI?
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's the being able to leverage those cloud providers and the things that they're best at, right? And saying, that is the best place to run this particular workload. I think that's a really attractive way to approach multi-cloud.
Yeah, and it's a concept that you used in the past as well. I mean, you run your applications on the hardware that's more suitable to run it on. I mean, you would run an Oracle database on Oracle Enterprise Linux as well. You would run an Active Directory on a Windows machine, which is very normal. I mean, and we just copy that concept over to the cloud. It's the same thing. So when we did it in the past, why not do it in the modern day as well, and just pick the best cloud for your solution?
Cool. So I think at the same time, while there's a bunch of advantages, Dries sort of called out a whole bunch of them in terms of adopting multi-cloud, that all of those things, don't come for free. There are trade-offs that are always part of any of these kinds of decisions. And, a lot of these decisions come at a cost. So, I mean, from my perspective, some of the main challenges that when I've seen organizations adopt multi-cloud, the first one is, again, just the complexity of the tooling. Now you have to understand, okay, what does AWS provide? What does OCI provide? What are the native tools that you can use to automate those kinds of workloads? How do you ensure that there's consistency from one cloud provider to another to be able to make sure those processes or those workflows are standardized even when the workloads themselves are not necessarily portable from one cloud provider to another. And so that tooling and that your ability to leverage that tooling becomes, a lot more difficult. Another one is, security and compliance. If you are a organization that is subject to some kind of regulatory compliance, or based on some or agreement that your organization has gotten into, how do you take that same regulation, whether that is a GDPR, a high trust, a SOC 2, ISO 27001, and implement that in your cloud environment, and not just in your single cloud environment, but in multiple cloud environments? How do you translate a control around access control and say, okay, like, what does this mean when I'm talking about this cloud provider? How does that change? And what are the semantic differences of that cloud that might impact my ability to meet that regulatory compliance standard? And so those are real, difficult considerations for people who are adopting multi-cloud. There's no choice. You have to be compliant. And the question is, well, how are you going to implement it? And the last thing is that now, as similar to, I think, the first one, the people who are adopting these technologies may be only familiar with one of them, maybe familiar with none of them, maybe they're new to the industry. How do you go about lowering, not necessarily lowering, but making it more accessible for a broader group of people who can take advantage of these technologies to do their job, and make it possible for those people to, create the automation that they need? So yeah, sorry, Dries is now going to talk about, what happens when reality actually sets in and organizations are doing this in earnest.
Yeah, I often compare it to a relationship, right? As with every relationship, after a while, you start to see those little annoyances, those little cracks appear that seemed like a good idea in the beginning, but now show some flaws. And I'm not talking purely about technical issues here, but also from a business or an operational perspective, of course, where customers, engineers only had to focus on one cloud provider in the past. They now have to know two. Each with its own language, terminology, specific concepts. They all do the same thing, or mostly do the same thing, but they call it differently, and it works just slightly so different than it did on your original cloud provider. And all of a sudden, of course, they also had to know two different APIs instead of one. Also, in the specific customer case that I described earlier, the Oracle team took the lead in adopting the Oracle cloud knowledge. So you no longer had one team being the expert in AWS. You now had an AWS expert team and an OCI expert team, and trying to get most out of each platform. So that did emerge a new kind of a discussion that we never had before, like, what platform component should we run on which public cloud provider, or do we just keep it on premise? Which is it's a whole new type of discussion no one of them ever had. Neither did we, by the way. So it's how do you decide on which cloud is the best? And as in every discussion, you always have the fanboy discussion. I call it the fanboy discussion, where you really start talking about features, and everybody likes his cloud the best. Probably it is. Every cloud is the best in what it does, but we just have to figure out what cloud is the best for what. And then one of the other things was like, what's the best platform? For example, what is the best platform to run our Puppet infrastructure on? Is it just VMware? Is it Azure? Is it Google Cloud? Is it something else? We don't know. I mean, does anyone? Yeah, that's one of the things. So we had to start figuring out what strategies would alleviate these multi-cloud struggles, and how we could solve these new type of challenges we faced.
Well, why don't you tell us, Dries, what strategies can actually help us, solve some of these challenges?
Yeah. So what we started to do is we started thinking about orchestration over different cloud providers, and no longer adopt the vendor lock-in scripting like CloudFormation we had before, but create abstractions on top of that and adopt tools like Terraform, for example. This allowed us to describe infrastructure, and decide where to run it later on. And we could use the same language across clouds, because a node is a node in Terraform. It doesn't really matter where you deploy it.
Yeah.
Second thing is, how do you get output from API 1 into API 2 at the right time without human intervention? Connecting your ticketing tool to a script in API 1 is difficult, but trying to do that with multiple cloud APIs or create workflows, for example, where Cloud B should wait on a task to finish on Cloud 1, it's all real struggles. Creating the right abstractions there, and to create that abstractions, we really learned a lot from what's happening in the cloud native movement. They describe very well how you should abstract those kind of APIs and how you abstract the lower layers higher up in your stack. And we really learned a lot of that. Yeah, and of course, with the help from Kenaz and his team, of course, they helped us a lot in understanding and teaching us the things about Relay. And finally, we let the AWS experts be the AWS experts, by the way. Yeah.
At the end of the talk.
Yeah. So finally, let the AWS experts be the AWS experts. They know the platform inside and out. Just make sure that they create an interface for the other teams, so they can also run automations with the same confidence as the experts of that cloud. In DevOps terms, we are no DevOps engineers. We are just developers, operations engineers, security officers, and what have you. Having these three strategies in the back of our minds made things a lot easier to manage. So it is often still hard, but not as much as it was in the beginning.
It sounds like it's not just blanket, like everyone learn everything, and it's not just everyone build the same workflows across all the cloud providers. Nope. But in some ways, you pick and choose. You still build some workflows that are cross cloud, but there is specialization, especially for certain people, to basically say, I am an expert at this particular technology, and being able to then create an interface, as the words you use, to other people being able to leverage their skills. That is a really valuable strategy.
Exactly.
And I thought it was interesting that when you talked about the right abstraction. Again, it to me goes back to that idea of workflow portability, being able to say that even though the actual workload might look slightly different on these different cloud providers, that ultimately I can use the same tools that I'm comfortable with to be able to leverage these different cloud providers and rely on the tool to handle the underlying abstraction, whether it's to your point, Terraform and their provider API, or something else.
Yeah, at Bryxx we like to call that being tool and cloud agnostic.
Yeah,
like you should just concentrate on building the tool, building the solution, and worry where to run it and how to run it later on in the cycle. Just make it work for you and your customer and your team, and then later on we can pick and choose how to run and where to run. But that requires the correct number of abstractions indeed.
Cool. So I'm actually going to plug in a shameless plug here for Relay. We've been working with Dries for a while on implementing Relay and helping use Relay to help solve some of these multi-cloud operational challenges. Again, Relay is fully available. Feel free to sign up today. Try it out. It'll be me. If you type in the little intercom box and ask a question, it's me on the other end who's actually answering it. So, feel free to reach out. Cool. Thanks, Dries. So, in conclusion, a couple sort of closing thoughts. I think, one of the first ones and the first kind of threads that I pull out of, Dries's wealth of knowledge and experience that he's sharing with us is to start small and not try to, boil the ocean when it comes to these multi-cloud projects, but picking one thing, like we talked about, that kind of one OCI workload, and taking, okay, that makes sense. It's got to make sense for you to take that one workload and run it in a cloud provider. Don't try to do everything. Don't try to orchestrate everything, but picking one thing. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Start small and use the easy things to automate because you know them already. Start automating with the things you already know. It makes life so much easier.
For sure. The second one here is what I call a portfolio of cloud bets, which is as you start to adopt these individual technologies for these cloud providers, not all of those are going to work out. I mean, you might find that okay, like this is that innovation that you were able to take advantage of is now holding you back in a different way. And so being able to say to have a bring the same sort of mentality that you might bring to a financial portfolio and saying, okay, like 80% of these workloads we're going to do on this cloud provider. For this 20% or even for this 5% of riskier bets, we'll leverage and take advantage of these particular services in order to see if we can actually gain the benefits from adopting it. But otherwise, if it doesn't work out, you still you have a consistent cloud strategy that enables you to sort of fall back on your last known good. The last thing here is multi-cloud is here. Going back to the very beginning, if north of 90% of organizations are considering multi-cloud, this isn't something that is in the future. It's not in the next 3 to 5 years. Like organizations are realizing some of these benefits and starting through this journey right now. And where the ability to kind of navigate these challenges I think is unavoidable for organizations that are wanting to leverage or take advantage of the benefits of a multi-cloud strategy. All right, well, that is our talk for today. Thanks for listening and coming, and we'll see you later.
See you later, guys.
That was a really cool talk, and yeah, thank you very much, Dries and Kenaz, for doing that one. We are fortunate enough to have them still available to us to do some Q&A, and we had one question come through from Zach, which I think is probably a fairly high level one, and Kenaz, I think it's really going to be directed at you. It's not super clear what Relay is, what does it do, and why do we need it? I'm not sure that you haven't just seeded this question yourself to do more promotion of Relay, but yeah, I was wondering whether or not you could give us a sort of a very high level rundown, or even maybe potentially a quick live demo, being we're running a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Oh yeah, sure.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but
No worries. So yeah, real quick, sort of 5-minute pitch for Relay. Relay, we describe it as an easy workflow automation platform for cloud operations teams. To Tony's point, it's basically a little bit like Zapier or like an IFTTT, but specifically for DevOps and cloud operations teams. And so you can check it out, relay.sh. The whole idea is that that by taking these kind of low code workflows, you're able to put together steps and triggers to be able to solve some of these kinds of challenges. So for instance, if you're running in a cloud environment, there's a whole set of workflows that we kind of have out of the box to support things like being able to clean up unused resources. And so there's a number of these kind of hygiene-like tasks. I'll give you a sneak peek of some of the, is this warning? Okay, sweet. Basically like, hygiene-like tasks to be able to say like, okay, in a Azure load balance, for a variety of like, say, Azure resources that don't get cleaned up whenever you delete the VM, you may want to go periodically and go clean up things like unused load balancers or NICs or even untagged VMs or other kinds of resources. And what Relay makes possible is the ability to kind of click a button, try this workflow, and then be able to sign up. It's a SaaS service today. I'm gonna just show you how pretty easy it is to get set up and going. It prompts you to set up a workflow by trying that particular workflow. All the workflows are backed by code, and so there's a definition here that uses YAML to just describe the different steps and triggers in that particular workflow. It prompts you to fill out your connection, which will connect to your Azure account. In this case, we have similar workflows for AWS and GCP and OCI as other cloud providers. And from there, you can go in and run the workflow once I set up my connections. That's sort of one kind of use case that you can use Relay to do. Another whole set of these use cases are around sort of incident response. And so we have these triggers, which are basically webhook receivers. Well, there's a couple different types of triggers, like webhook receivers, a cron schedule, as well as a HTTP trigger, which you can use. So in one of our customers that we've been working with uses it to basically issue rollbacks for deployments in Kubernetes when they receive a certain type of alert. And so we have support for for Datadog, for Alert Manager, the Prometheus Alert Manager, as well as Dynatrace, a couple of these other monitoring platforms, which can receive alerts and then go and trigger different types of auto remediation activities. And so that can be anything from like I mentioned, a Kubernetes rollback, or you can even talk to Puppet and Puppet Enterprise and be able to trigger tasks that you might have created if you have a Bolt plan or wanting to run Puppet Agent in response to one of those things. And all of that is possible using the integrations that are built in. I think that was 5 minutes. Hopefully that helps to answer the question. Again, feel free to ping me. Make the font bigger. Sorry about that. Here we go. I'll show you like an example of a workflow that actually ran, so you can see. As part of this workflow, when it actually runs, you can see that we'll list the the NICs in this particular account. We can pop open this and we see, okay, here are all the NICs that are, and then which of those are unused. We can filter those for here. And then, as part of that, we will get approval. We can do manual approvals to say like, hey, you need to say like, manually approve this before deleting it. And then finally, like actually deleting the NICs. And so there's a couple of workflows like that. There's a number of these other use cases that, around compliance, around auto remediation, around continuous delivery, and we are actively working on building out these example workflows.